This is Chapter 4, Myths of Creation 1, The Rise of Zeus. First, before we start with myths dealing with creation, let me say this about many of the passages in your book. When Pal quotes from ancient Greek and Latin, he keeps to the spirit of the texts. These texts were written in verse as opposed to prose. Prose is how the regular chapters in the book are written. It's how we write when we communicate. It involves complete sentences structured in paragraphs. Verse is the structure of poems and of songs. When the ancient Greeks originally wrote down their stories, they wrote them in verse, much like how they were performed. Verse is what we use for poetry and for songs, which in a sense are poems put to music. When you first start to read them, I'm sure you will find them sometimes difficult to plow through. Just remind yourself they are written like poetry, and for the purposes of this class, you don't have to appreciate them as poems, but rather as stories. Can you read them and get the essence of the action of the characters in them? With time and practice, reading verse in this course will get easier. And remember, while reading is necessary, these video lectures are here to help you through understanding the stories as a whole. Again, don't forget to place these myths in their time. For the creation myths, they certainly take place way before human memory, at least of ancient Greek society. This chapter begins with a quote from Hesiod, who is given credit for theogony, or origins of the gods. It is this: "Sing all this to me, muses, who dwell on Olympus, from the beginning of, tell me which of the gods first came to be." Your author makes the point that in order to explain why Zeus came to be supreme among the gods, we need to go back to the origin of everything. We will begin by looking at two words. The first, cosmogony, means a story that explains the origin of the world. The second, theogony, means a story that explains the origin of the gods. While we'll see the distinction between worlds and gods, Hesiod saw them as the same. For him, there was no world without gods. How many times have you heard a story that begins somewhat like this? Long ago, in a very faraway place. Hesiod in Theogony takes us to the very beginning, to the generation of chaos, which means chasm, to Gaia, which means earth, and to Uranus, which means sky. There is a purpose in Hesiod's storytelling, as he is telling the story of how Zeus rose to prominence. So not only is he telling us how the world came to be, he's telling us about Zeus's rise to power. This is a good time to bring up the term primordial. Primordial means existing at or from the beginning of time. Another word often used is primeval. Chaos, Gaia, and Uranus are primordial beings. As far as Hesiod is concerned, these guys were at the very beginning. How did it all begin? Let me read from the text, which is on your slide. Chaos was the first to appear, then Gaia, Earth, the broad-bosomed, unshakable base of things. Then Tartarus, wind-swept and dark, deep in the caverns of broad-wayed earth. And Eros, the fairest of all immortals, arose, who frees us from our sorrows, but ruins our heart's good sense, breaking the wisest intention of gods and mortal alike. From chaos came Erebus, darkness, and Nux, night, mother of ether, radiance, and Hemra, day. These Nux conceived by united with Erebus, gloomy and somber. This is from Hesiod's Theogony, lines 116 to 125. Okay, now let's parse this passage out. Who was first? Chaos. We think of chaos as disorder, but the literal meaning here is gap, yawn, not as what we do when we're tired, but as the dictionary states, an opening or a space, to be very large and wide, or more specifically, chasm. Now, who was second? It was Gaia. Hesiod even describes Gaia as broad-bosomed, unshakable base of things. We can see the relation between base and earth. By using the word bosom, he is assigning the gender female to Gaia, and we most often refer to her as feminine. Others even refer to her as Mother Earth. Who is next in the text? Tartarus. Tartarus is described as wind-swept and dark, deep in the caverns of Broadway earth. Powell makes the point that this Tartarus is not the same as the one we will regard in a region of Hades. Here, Tartarus is a primordial being that Gaia will have offsprings with. The fourth is Eros, who is described as the fairest of all immortals. That's a nice description. Hesiod goes on to tell us that Eros frees us all from our sorrows, but ruins our heart's good sense, breaking the wisest of intentions of gods and mortal alike. Eros also stands for sexual love or attraction. Keep in mind that Eros here is not the same as Cupid in the Roman tradition, although sexual love seems to link them. Notice that Hesiod does not say that Gaia, Tartarus, and Eros sprang from chaos. Scholars, including Powell, sees them as existing independently as primeval stuff. Be sure to read through the explanation. One thing about studying myth, especially the origins, it's that it's more like figuring out how the puzzle pieces fit together. For instance, does Erebus and Nux come from chaos? If so, maybe the other primeval beings do too. According to Hesiod, it took 3 generations to go from the original gods to Zeus. I know that I have chaos listed separately here. It's just to emphasize its prominence among the other primordial beings. So the first generation are the primordial beings, which we have just gone over. The next or second generation are the Titans. And finally, the third generation are the Olympians.